Hello, and welcome to Coyotenomics, the web show in which Tyson and I...
A web show?
It's a web show. We talk about things that interest us.
On the web?
On the web. And today we're going to talk about a fairly common libertarian myth. This is something that I was exposed to a couple of years ago, probably about a decade ago, and I believed completely, because it came from somebody who I trusted at the time. His name was Stefan Molyneux, a very common YouTube libertarian dude, but I've heard it elsewhere as well. There's a common or a popular Reason.com article about it. The idea that the Pilgrims, when they first arrived to America, were dying when they lived in socialist communes, but then they enacted private property laws, and this caused a boon of wealth, and that inspired the first Thanksgiving. It was all the profits that were produced through private property.
Can I just say I love the idea of turning Thanksgiving into like a success of capitalism?
Yeah, absolutely. It's hilarious. And yeah, apparently this is a common idea. The Reason.com article I read did reference how William Bradford, one of the first leaders of the Pilgrims, noted that they were struggling to produce enough food, and they did end up enacting parcels of land that were individually allotted to people, and that apparently produced more food. But as well, that's not the reason they originally didn't starve, because when the colonists first arrived, they had planned to do fishing. Also, I should say, a lot of this information I'm referencing is from 1491, the wonderful book that explores pre-Columbian Native American societies.
This is Luke's new favorite book.
It's
and
great.
It's not even by Thomas Sowell.
It's true. It's crazy. And so, yeah, when the Pilgrims first arrived, they didn't actually have much of a plan for survival. They had planned to fish, but didn't bring the appropriate tackle for fishing. Then they thought maybe we'll farm, but none of them knew how to farm. They were basically throwing themselves into the abyss. They were not very well planned. This is like a common theme of a lot of early settlers, is they kind of just... They didn't plan much. They kind of just threw themselves into a hostile environment. And yeah, they didn't really know how to farm either. And they originally survived by looting stores of grain that were placed there from old tribes that had been killed by disease. Like when they set up shop in an abandoned Indian village that had been emptied out by disease a few years earlier, and they found stores of grain, and that's how they survived the first few months. Then eventually, Massasoit, a local leader, he found it politically advantageous to ally with them because he was being threatened by other tribes, and he thought, maybe if I ally with the local white people, I can get some edge in the combat or in diplomacy. And so that alliance was formed, and then Tisquanto famously showed the Pilgrims. Tisquanto was a Native American from that tribe. He famously showed the Pilgrims how to plant the maize in a way that it would grow properly, and to plant beans and squash along with the maize and combine in a mutually beneficial, productive arrangement. And so Tisquanto apparently helped them a large way survive in that new context. And it wasn't just access to private property laws that made the difference. If anything, private property might have slightly increased their productive capacity, but the original reason they were almost going to die was not that they were socialistic. I mean, all the tribes that surrounded them were all socialistic in this sense. They shared all their food, or at least most of it. And yeah, so just the notion that that's the reason that they were about to starve to death is just nonsense. They didn't plan. They didn't have any means of survival, and they looted local stores, and that's how they survived. But
so is the myth that they made this shift to property rights, or that the shift to property rights was responsible for their success? Like, did they actually do that?
Well, I would assume it's true, that because it's referenced in history that William Bradford did make this shift, but they were about to die because they didn't plan, and their way of surviving was help from the locals and basically stealing from dead people. Yeah. I would say the myth is that was the determining factor that allowed them to survive.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. And I won't belabor the point. That's pretty much the long and short of it.
Yeah.
So what do you have?
I was just going to say, do you think that in some ways shows that property owning values are more compatible with their European cultural norms, and socialism was more compatible with Native American cultural norms?
I'm not
like
sure.
they, you know, one group of people was more successful in one system and one group of people was more successful in a different model?
Well, not necessarily. It's also been shown that modern Native American tribes, when they're given right to own private property, they're like 35 to 40% more productive with that land.
For sure.
So I think it is true across the board that when people are given the products of their labor and those incentive structures, they produce more. But I don't think that 35 or 40% productive capacity is going to make the difference between life or death in most cases.
For sure.
And I don't think that was the case in the Pilgrims.
Yeah, absolutely. Very excellent point.
Catch you coyotes next time!